the condition. And say, in case Stan did not mention that the webinar is being recorded. So you'll be able to view it at a later time, as will other people who registered who weren't able to be here. Just so that you're aware that you're being recorded, any remarks that you make or questions that you have. I'm just delighted, so happy to introduce Hetty Sumner. Hetty is a registered nurse and has a Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree. And before her retirement, Hetty served as the care manager and the director of dementia services and the director of resources and development for senior services and the Midland County Council on Aging in Michigan. She is the co-author of A Family-Centered Alzheimer's Care, a Caregiver's Manual, and Doing More with Less for the Michigan Dementia Coalition. Hetty provides trainings on dementia for staff of nursing homes, adult daycares, and adult foster care homes. She also provides trainings for ministers, deacons, and congregations on how to include people with disabilities, including those with dementia. And we're grateful that she also serves as a field associate for Anabaptist Disabilities Network. So she has a lot of great material to present to you today, and looking forward to learning a lot and having a good conversation on this important topic. So thank you so much, Hetty, for being willing to share your time and wisdom with us.
So I will go ahead and share screen.
Yes.
To video and music that's all lower left.
Okay. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you. I want to welcome everyone today. I am so happy that we've had such a wonderful turnout for this. And so what I want to do today is briefly go over some physical issues about dementia, and then we'll talk about congregational care, which we want to have as our main focus.
Down arrow or left mouse click.
Okay, what I want to start with is a definition of dementia. And many folks think that dementia is the same thing as Alzheimer's, but it's actually a set of symptoms that affects one's ability to think and process information day to day. And it actually interferes with how our daily life goes when one has it. And it's a syndrome, not an independent diagnosis. So I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. And we heard terms such as senility in the past and organic brain syndrome. So what does dementia do? It covers and impacts cognitive functions. Those include our memory, both short-term and long-term, orientation, understanding where we are, our language, use of words, use of grammar, our judgment, our ability to understand what we're doing and making proper assessments of how we should behave and act, personality, perception, understanding the world around us, and our ability to pay attention to what's going on around us. We also have the ability to perform tasks in sequence, and this can be as simple as brushing our teeth. So again, dementia interferes with daily life, and we see two basic types, reversible dementias and irreversible. And while all are treatable to some extent, there is no cure for the irreversible forms at this time. So, reversible forms of dementia are things such as intoxications, infections, metabolic disorders such as diabetes, vitamin deficiencies like B12, and then a host of other things such as medication reactions. And when we look at irreversible forms, the most common we think of is Alzheimer's dementia. That is not a term for every type. So we understand now that there are many types of irreversible dementias. So some of them are vascular, Lewy body, and frontotemporal. And I have a list of others here, and I'll go into those just a little bit more to help our understanding. So the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, and it becomes dementia when it impacts how we interact daily. So the earliest brain changes that we actually see may not have symptoms, and there's more that we're learning about that every day. Alzheimer's itself progressively affects new memories, and it causes difficulty finding words, confusion. That's how it starts. And we don't usually see these symptoms until after the age of 65. However, now we know there is actually a family inherited version that can strike at a younger age. And it's important what I'm going to tell you next. Alzheimer's disease lasts for 8 to 20 years. And I want us to understand that when a family is impacted by this type of dementia, it can last up to 20 years. So we really have to help with support. Other symptoms, struggling to complete tasks and the personality changes. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit more. Some of the other irreversible types that are most common are Lewy body dementia, a younger onset, and we see gait issues first, not memory, vascular dementia, and that is an earlier onset, largely related to obesity, diabetes, and can be with blood pressure. And strokes are what cause this. So it'll depend on where it is in the brain that we see the type of symptoms. A frontotemporal dementia, which is a younger onset, and other changes such as loss of hearing and personality. And then something Parkinson's in the later stages will often see actually dementia develop. So I'm going to go through these pictures quickly. I've added extra information so that when you get your PDFs, you can look through these. So preclinical Alzheimer's may show very little change whatsoever. So now we're looking at a healthy brain. So we want to look at this and see over time what happens as Alzheimer's progresses. So early stage with dementia of Alzheimer's type, we see the blue area is the hippocampus area. That's where short-term memories are processed. They go into our brain and we remember something there for at least 7 seconds so that it goes into long-term memory. If it can't encode in those 7 seconds, then it doesn't get into long-term memory. And I have a list of other symptoms that are here so that you can refer to these later. Again, memory loss is one of the first things we see and other associated issues. Next, when we look at more of a moderate or middle stage, you can view the blue area here and notice that memory center is darker blue, therefore there's more damage. And we start to see it go, the left part is the frontotemporal area, and then toward the right, we see the occipital areas of the brain. So that's making our symptoms more severe, not just memory loss and words, but the person's going to have difficulty with movement and objects. So more is happening, and we must remind them with care. As we move into the late stage of Alzheimer's, you can see that it moves throughout the brain. So at this point, you have a full list of symptoms, some of the symptoms here. We see that the person is more impaired. They are not as connected, and they are not identifying family or even where they are. But I want you to understand that as we look at even this late stage, we can still make connections through various ways that we're going to talk about. And then ultimately, the damage to the brain continues. And in end stage, I show these pictures because I want you to understand that, again, all the dementias are due to damage to the brain itself. And because of that, we see the symptoms occur. I've had to work with some families getting them to understand. They think if I just tell dad enough, he will remember. And as you can see, the brain is damaged so that it cannot function in the way it did before the progression of the disorder. So how are we going to use this information now? We want to look at how we provide congregational care. For people with dementia, we can maintain faith and identity. So the spiritual life, it does not end with dementia, but we can support and affirm our members, and we want to respect them as unique individuals. And we will provide a caring practice, helping them with recognizing still identity, a sense of belonging, and security, because that's something we all have related to our faith practices. So I really like this statement. Outside the door of every congregation, there are those who cannot enter, or once in, do not feel welcome. And we're going to talk about how do we open the door and welcome them in. And I'm going to tell you one quick story from my practice. One of my clients, the family, the caregiver and the spouse, let me know that they were no longer going to church. And this added to their sense of grief and loss. They had the grief and loss of Alzheimer's disease. They also had the grief and loss of losing their faith, family, and connections. So they said that what happened was people would look at them when the husband started singing, when they weren't leading a hymn. He started adding to the prayers verbally, and no one said anything, but there were glances. They told me that they gradually moved further back in the church and they sat on the last row. Finally, the wife told me in tears that they just didn't feel comfortable anymore, so they went out the back door and they had not returned. And that's one of the reasons I want us to talk today. We never want someone to have that feeling. And it wasn't anything anyone in the congregation said. What happened was, where they were in their sense of grief and loss with the dementia, they also were looking at any side glances, the way people looked at them, or poor you, and it was just too much for them to bear at that time. So what are we going to consider first as we try to work out how we're going to respond? How has the congregation responded to persons with dementia disorders within their midst? You want to think of that. Think, does this work? Can this be improved upon? And how can you do so? So things you can ask: what brings you hope? What brings you joy? What brings you meaning? And what brings you peace to your life? These are things for both the person with dementia and for the caregiver. So,
Hetty, we
Yes.
have a question in the chat.
okay.
Brandon Grady asks, how can I help someone I know who is suffering from memory loss to feel like they belong?
What you want to do is think of ways that you can include them on their level of functioning. And this may mean go back to ask those questions. What is it that I can do for you? But also think, and this is so timely, Brandon, thank you. And I'm going to just kind of go through and paraphrase this quote because it helps answer your question. When we think of persons with disabilities in relation to ministries, we think about doing something for them, but we have to think about, can they do something for us and with us? And they have the same duty to serve the community and do the Lord's work. So Brandon, what I would suggest, are there ways that you can still include your friend and think of an activity that you can do together to help serve others? That would be one way. And again, go through those basic questions and see what has meaning. What would you like? What makes you feel you? Those are some of the things that we can look at. I hope that helps, Brandon. So all of this and what Brandon just asked builds on the importance of faith and spirituality. Our faith is part of our long-term memory and practice. This is something embedded in us. And as I go through these steps, this next points, I want you to think even of yourself, not just of someone with dementia. The role of the church in one's life. What is the role of the church in your life? And what it would be in someone who's developed dementia. What is the person's role in the church? Do they serve in various areas? Board chair, Do they teach Sunday school? Are they in the choir? Do they lead music? What are the roles? And then realizing all of this comes together to give us a sense of who we are and linking us to our faith. And then the structure of the church and faith practices, what things give us peace and a sense of self? Is it services, other rituals, and prayers? Things are comforting to us. And think of yourself and then apply that to someone with dementia. So the importance of faith and spirituality continues with the emotions and feelings that remain. And we want to hook into those. And that is another way to connect. Validating feelings. Family members are also impacted, so we want to make sure that caregivers and other family members are not left out. As I mentioned before, there is this amazing sense of grief and loss when someone cannot connect to their church, and they're already going through this sense of grief and loss with a dementia diagnosis. So we're going to talk about ways to connect. And the importance remains even through those later stages. And again, I showed you the brain damage that happens with the later stages. We can still connect. So what you want to do is listen for words and phrases that someone may say that helps show you their link to their faith. And when you're listening, remember that this reassures the value of the person, and that's what we want to do. We want to validate people, and we can do that through responding to their emotions, but the important thing is to listen. So, some tips when you're visiting someone with memory loss. I want you to remember that you set the tone. Think about how you're presenting yourself, and you want to be calm, have a gentle approach. Always be aware of your own body language, because how we stand, if we're standing over someone, that can be threatening. You want to make sure that you're seated and at their eye level. And a very important thing is talk to the person. Do not talk about them to other people in the room, because you're there to make connections. If you talk about someone when they're there, that is really demeaning. You want to make sure they are connected. And again, we do this by getting their connection and attention. So we sit so that we're at eye level, and make sure that they're looking at you before you start speaking. You know that their connection is there. And if they're frustrated, provide reassurance. Let them know that they matter and that it's okay. We want to make the setting also free from distractions. Think if you're in a busy restaurant and it's hard to follow conversations. People with dementia, and this is for all types, have difficulty processing information, and it takes them longer. Since it takes longer, we want to make sure that there are no distractions present so that we can help them process the information. So another point that you want to think of is, whose reality is this? You may know folks with Alzheimer's that seem to live in the past. So what you want to do when you're visiting someone is remember the person lives in the moment, and you're going to meet them where they are at that moment. And remember that reality may be in the past. You may be visiting John, who thinks he's 40 years old and will be telling you about what it was like at work that day. What you can do is join them in his sharing and tell him how interested you are to hear that, so that they feel validated. Do not try to orient someone to the present if they are in a past moment. The reason for this is it can be very, very confusing. For them, it may be 1975, and you saying that it is not, it's 47 years later, is very confusing, and they can't comprehend that. It is okay when you're visiting to ask someone how they're feeling so that you can validate that. And by validating these feelings, people, again, I'll say, they know they've been heard and recognized. And this helps add to a sense of identity. You want to use straightforward, short responses. And you're going to get short responses from someone, again, because of their ability to use language. But if you are speaking in a slow manner and not giving a long worded speech about what you've done that morning, they're going to understand better what you're saying, and you know then that they're listening and able to connect. So some of the things we want to think about is language that works and some techniques that we can use to enhance communication. Use short, simple sentences, again, because of the processing ability. Lower the pitch of your voice. That seems to be easier for folks as we get older for us to hear. Use concrete, familiar words. You don't want to use acronyms or acronyms that you use when texting. That's going to be very confusing to someone. Speak slowly and say the words clearly. We want to avoid open-ended questions because that can make it more difficult for them to process the information. And if you're doing a task or an activity with someone, break it down into simple steps. And this can be as simple, if you're helping John get his coat on after church, you may you have to say, you lift your arm, you need to do this. And the other thing we want to do is help reduce choices. And one of the simple ways I explain this is, if your mom has dementia and you take her to a restaurant, you don't want to just give her a menu. That's overwhelming. What you can do is offer one or two choices. Would you like the chicken or fish? That's more simple for her to understand.
Hetty, I have another question from Lisa Stanger.
Okay.
She says, it's a comment and then a invitation for you to comment, I think. She says, hospice companies have been dropping their chaplains due to financial cuts. When a spouse can't go to church anymore or the loved one with them, this is the only source they sometimes get for spiritual support. Any feedback on this?
Wow. And that is a huge issue that so many of my clients experience. One of the things that I know some congregations are doing, they are actually having visits set up to work through and do a short service with families. And some families, some groups are now doing this again at nursing homes. Okay, and I understand this is a huge loss. And I recognize that for people with memory loss, doing Zoom does not always work. So think of ways that congregations can reach out. I am aware of a congregation that actually provides a short service for families with dementia so that they can participate. And they have 5 families that participate. The scripture is always from a familiar text, and the hymns are older hymns that the people would have. And it's a shorter, more simpler sermon that is given. So that is one thing that I am aware of that is being done. So I hope that helps. And the others who are joining may have other ideas that their congregations are doing. Is that enough at this point, Jean?
Yes.
Okay, so being understood by the person with memory loss also takes work. So remember that silence is golden. Allow enough time for the person to process the information. You don't want to say too many things at one time. Just think about that. Even being with someone and being there with your presence makes a difference. You can repeat words and speak slowly when you are saying something, as I mentioned, and allow that time. And being understood, try demonstrating visually. If you were meeting John where he lives and you're having lunch together, you may be sitting at the table and he doesn't understand it's time to start. Pick up your fork. and you can say his name and show him what you're doing. That's a visual demonstration. Reassure someone if they get frustrated. Remember too that frustration comes because the person can no longer express themselves as they want to because of their verbal abilities. So it's nothing you have done. Provide reassurance. Try a hug and change the subject if the frustration continues. The other thing, distraction. Change to another topic if the person becomes frustrated. And use music to connect. For many individuals, one of the things that we have is losing that verbal ability, but music's in a different part of the brain, and we can continue through singing and other ways. And always listen. I will say that over and over. So understanding them, person with memory loss, is still that active listening and watching for their body language and facial expressions, because we want to make sure that, you know, we are trying to connect. Focus on one word or phrase that they say and respond to their emotional tone. They may say something, pause, and then, you know, it's okay to say, well, John, or you don't look happy at the moment. That is an okay thing to say. Always stay calm and be patient, because by you being there that way, you are setting a tone that will resonate with the person. And I've done it over and over, that by staying calm when someone is frustrated, that can help calm them down. And again, an interlude with music can help calm and connect. When words don't work, I will again talk about distraction. We look at music, and I know I say that a lot, and it's over and over because it works in so many situations. Have a memory box. That can be a shoebox with items that the person likes or attaches to their past. Photos. And this can be simple photo book, 10 or 12 photos at the most, that you can look at together. Think of other forms of communication, whether it's signs, communication boards, touch, walking, and even dancing. I have seen work to connect people. And model what you're asking them to do, as the example I gave with if you're sitting to eat. And I always think of us as good brethren offering food. Food or drink acts as a distraction. You can have that, say a short prayer, and connect as you join in enjoying something to eat. Ignore outbursts and never take any outbursts personally, because again, the person can't express themselves verbally anymore. They are sharing their frustration in the only way they know how at this point. Some activities you can do together. Always remember that before you visit with someone, you also want to confer with family or staff. You want to know the person. You want to find out what were their interests in the past, because if someone thinks they are living in 1975, they are going to link with things that are going on there. So what is familiar at that time? Think of what they enjoy. Again, refreshments, but okay that diet first to make sure you're doing the right thing. Give no more than 2 or 3 choices if you brought an activity to do together, because you want to keep it simple and not confusing. Think of faith symbols or rituals, favorite Bible, a hymnal. If you're going to use scripture, use a translation that would be familiar with them. The newer translations, and we think of the voice and the message, that may not connect with someone who is 85 years old, thinks they're in 1975, and you read something and it doesn't sound like scripture to them. Pictures, again, simple, but don't ask them complex questions. You can talk about things such as, you look like you're really having fun here, and the feelings that you're seeing, so that you can connect that way. and simple games, but check with the family ahead of time and recognize that if you played games in the past, it may not work as the person's dementia progresses. So,
Hetty,
yes.
Hetty, I have a comment from Cheryl Polovich. She says, I have found that asking, do you remember, can create great dis-ease for a person with dementia.
Oh, yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up. By asking, do you remember, you have touched the source point for an individual with dementia. Because by doing so, it gives them a feeling of inadequacy. So what I always say is never, ever ask, do you remember? You can talk about where they are in the moment, as I mentioned. And again, thank you for bringing that up, because asking someone if they remember just reinforces that they're having that difficult time. So what we also want to do is, if they're living in the past and they're talking about going, oh, I want to go home and see my mother, don't say things like, oh, well, your mother died 10 years ago, and because that reimagines the whole grief system the person went through then. So you never want to do that. And I've had people say, I don't lie to my dad. I'm going to tell him the truth. And what I say is, you're not lying to an individual. You are meeting them in the moment that they are living in. And by meeting them in that moment, you are validating them as an individual. So that's what we want to do. So thank you for saying that.
Hetty,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So as an example, if someone said, I want to go home and see my mother, what is a kind of response? What are options for good responses to that, or responses that might be helpful?
When my clients would say that, what I would do, oh, you miss your mother. You really love your mother. Can you tell me about her? And talk about some of their activities they did together. Now, this doesn't say, do you remember your mother? What you're doing is you make a comment like that, and usually, and what I've observed, the person kind of sits back and says things like, oh, I really loved my mother. And you can see, depending on the stage of dementia they're in, what other type of response they bring up, and then you respond to the things that they are talking about and interact. What you're doing, again, is living in their moment. Okay?
Thank you.
So I want to mention behavioral issues, because that's sometimes a concern for folks who are visiting. These can be repetitive activities, from asking the same question in 5 minutes. It can be jiggling keys. It can be opening a book and slamming it shut. These things, if you're visiting, can be annoying to you. But remember, these are activities that sometimes are almost encoded in the person's behavior at the stage they're in at the moment. Other things you can see, like I said, are questions and comments being repeated. Pacing. I've especially seen this in adult daycares and in nursing homes, where someone will pace up and down the hall for what seems like hours. Disrobing, and this is a comfort issue for folks when this happens. You may see someone that has a short temper. Again, it's dealing with their own frustrations. And sundowning, and this is where someone gets more confused. What you can do with these, provide distractions and reassurance that it's okay, you're going to be okay. Next, I want to start leading us to, how do we help people with dementia attend church? And I recognize that this is not possible for all families. But what you want to do ahead of time is talk to the family and let them know, ask them to let you know when they plan to attend, so that you can kind of have backup plans and things in place when they're there. Suggest they have extra time to get ready. When families deal with dementia, and I know we went through this with my dad, If we needed to get ready for something, we needed to add an extra hour to it. And that can help. And sometimes it's just when you're so overwhelmed dealing with it, you don't realize just to add that time. Welcome the person and the caregiver when they come into church. We want to make sure everyone is welcome because we really need to validate both. Have with someone, have a familiar object to hold, whether it's a favorite Bible, a hat. For my grandmother, it was her prayer covering. Think of what can be familiar. And another point I'd like to bring now, if Mary joined, say, the Church of the Brethren in her 50s, but she has dementia, she's 85 and thinks she's 40. And at 40, she belonged to the Roman Catholic Church. She may ask for her priest. She may ask for what happened to my rosary beads. Think of these and prepare. Think about how you can help her be involved and feel comfortable. And what I want to stress too is the things you're learning today, our church leaders model behaviors to other in the congregation. So as you meet someone, as you give examples of how to greet, those are all things that can make a big difference. We also want to think of accessibility. Barriers can be architectural. So can the caregiver and the person with dementia get in easily? What forms of communication are we using that can make it easier? And then think about the attitudes, and that goes back. Someone may not think about, they may say nothing, but yet even a frown at someone who is uncomfortable can make them feel inadequate. We don't want to do that and add to their frustration. So
Hetty?
Yes.
So someone put a comment in, let's see, Cheryl Polovich, excuse me, about behavioral issues, said it can be disconcerting if a spouse with dementia thinks someone else is their spouse and may act out accordingly. And I might broaden that to say, just socially inappropriate behavior in general, right? Can be disconcerting. And how do we manage that?
And that is always a challenge. And interestingly, one of my colleagues had that happen in Michigan, had that happen with her husband who had dementia. And in the beginning, one thing we have to understand how it happens is when the dementia extends, and I showed you how the blue extends to the brain, in our frontal lobe is also kind of our filter of our appropriate behaviors. And as that's impacted, that is lost. So someone may make comments because they no longer have that buffer. In some situations, you can talk to the individual in the earlier stages of dementia and explain that this is how we interact. So you also want to try to redirect them. And other things that we can do when we're looking at that, because I know it's frustrating to everyone, is recognize that at some point, if the person does not recognize family members, does not recognize their spouse, and again, thinks they're 30 years old, how do we work this out? And it varies a little for each family, how they can deal with it. Separating people, sometimes it's what works. You can control that if the person lives at home. If someone lives in a facility, you can meet with the social worker there and kind of work out a plan. What my colleague did in Michigan was, when her husband no longer recognized her or anyone else, and again, this was a personal choice on how to handle this, she realized that her husband had a friend that he would sit with They would hold hands and watch TV, and they would have dinner together. She decided that if that was giving him peace where he was at that moment, that it was okay with her. And that was as intimate as they were allowed to be. I will add that. So you have to look at what you can work out in a particular situation, and it's going to be a little bit different for each family. And I know it is one of the toughest issues for caregivers to go through. That's what I have right now, Jean, you know, and I'll try to reach out to my friend who went through this and see if there's more later on, if someone reaches out to me for more sharing.
Thank you. And I'm just going to let you know that we're at 1:45 right now.
Okay,
And so I'm going to hold any other comments and questions until after you're finished.
that would be good. Thank you. So what can we do? We want to listen. We want to create a supportive atmosphere for a caregiver and the person with dementia. Structure appropriate activities and have a routine. For people with dementia, a routine is paramount. Having if they come into the church, how they are welcomed. They may have the same place to sit, but always have a routine. Simplify the environment, and the service can be helpful. And I mentioned what another congregation is doing. They also facilitate peer groups, and that's choirs, separate service, separate activities. These can be for the person with dementia and the caregiver, or it can be open to folks with dementia in the community. Have quiet space available if someone gets overstimulated. That's always important. And I have to stress, if you say you're going to visit, please do so. So how do we help our caregivers? Offer the visit, provide a meal, or provide a break if someone feels comfortable visiting with the person with dementia, to give them some respite time. Anticipate possible needs. These families may come up. You know your individual family, so you have the keys for those. Know what your community resources are, and I'm going to share some of that at the end. Promote respite services in your area. Learn what those are, because those are very vital. Offer individual and family support if able, and encourage participation in education and support groups, and education also for other members of your congregation. And again, if you say you're going to visit the caregiver, visit. That is important. Faith needs of the person with dementia. We want to support them in all levels of dementia. I've shown what happens. We want to make sure we understand and can meet their needs. Faith plays a major role for strength and support for coping for all of us, and it's even more so for persons with dementia and their caregivers. Validation of faith experience, going to church and participating in one's abilities makes a difference for all of us and continues as dementia progresses. And an opportunity for persons with dementia to minister to others. Thank you, Brandon, again. That can be vital. Help them stay involved and not just have others do for them. Support needs for both persons with dementia and the caregivers, and recognize they both need to be heard. There's a need to follow faith practices of one's own choice. And I mentioned the person I knew who forgot that they were now a member of the Church of the Brethren. Their reality was that they were Catholic. The need to experience faith and spirituality regularly. We know that makes a sense of who we are, and everyone needs that. And the need to be involved in a community of faith is so important for all of us. So, concerns that I've heard when people do visitation, I don't want to say the wrong thing. We've all been there. Behaviors frighten me. What does it mean? John started taking his clothes off, so I left. That I remember my grandmother, and I do not want to set her off. What if that's me, my dad, my spouse, next? And we all can internalize those worries. I need tips on how to visit and what to do and say. And I realize today we've only scratched the surface on what those tips are, but I hope that does help some. So, what can your church do? Be welcoming and affirming, listen for needs, ask, what can we do? And you want to help members with dementia use their talents, build a dementia-friendly community, faith community, and share what you've learned. Consider other trainings for other folks in your congregation so that all can understand dementia and know the resources. And I'm going to show those slides just shortly. So I've added this song, and because of time today, I'm not going to go into the details. I know that Jean has shared the articles that I wrote for the AdNet newsletter. And so if you could go read that, this was about a dear friend of ours from my Michigan church, and one of our other members wrote that garden sleep, with her last stages of dementia, we were looking at how music was the one thing that connected her. So garden sleep beneath the silence of deep snow, winter is her only season with its songs, drifting just below the horizon of her memory. For a moment, she surfaces like the sun in the morning, singing spring of the quiet that lays deep banks, waist high. Then dipping back beneath her frost, she grows quiet, and song wraps her in its warmth until the gardens awake. And that, to make a connection, and that's what we want to know and understand, that we can't make connections every time, but we can certainly try. And so your resources, which Stan and Jean have both mentioned, that are available to you, I'll just show the slides very quickly. Here, there are books that can help clergy and congregations. There are also free resources through National Institutes on Aging. There are other web links that are available that you can find and help track local resources. And there's a PDF here that gives you tips for visiting, as well as how to look up other social resources through the navigator.org. So, and another Brain magazine that can offer help. This has articles on various types of dementia and other neurological disorders. So thank you for joining us today. And I am going to stop screen sharing at this time.
Thank you so much, Hetty. Really appreciate all that good information. We'll be sending out a link to you all with the recording of the webinar, along with those resources, the list of resources, because those went by really quickly. I want to open it now to anybody who has any questions for Hetty. We have a few minutes for that.
And I want folks to understand too, that not everything works every time. Every case of dementia you see is different. Even it has the same specific diagnosis. So we all learn by trial and error. But I hope this scratches the surface and gives you places to start.
Anyone have any questions for Hetty today?
I would have a question. This is Rebecca. Have you ever had a church that had kind of a semi-formal recognition of somebody's status as in the journey of having dementia? So like some kind of liturgy or just an announcement where we could recognize as a body, this is happening to this family whom we love.
Thank you for bringing that up. I have not had a congregation that I've worked with do that. I know folks have kind of talked about it. Part of that, you would have to talk to the family and also make sure that this would be something that would be comfortable for the individual. And it can vary with the stage of dementia that they are actually in. So I can see that working for some folks, but maybe not working for others. I had a dear friend in Michigan that when he got dementia, he didn't want to talk about it at all. And even in the later stages, he didn't want anyone saying the word dementia near him. And I don't know if there was something that happened in his journey of dementia or what, but this can be done, I think, talking it over with a specific family, because that can validate an individual by recognizing that, yes, you're on a journey and we are here with you. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And that's something I'm going to make a note of myself.
We have a comment from Cheryl Shirk, who says, I think it is important to note that just because part of dementia is losing the filter, that doesn't mean that everything that comes out is who they really are and what they always wanted to do.
That is so spot on. We have to understand that yes, we lose the filter, but then there are other things going on with individual, the frustration level. There are many things going on that impact what comes out of there. And I will add that I did have a client in Michigan that before he got dementia, he had been labeled as crotchety before, and working with him, ironically, became easier after he had dementia, but I know that it may not be. And so sometimes there are aspects of an individual that are difficult, and it's trial and error. What I really encourage folks to always do is share with each other what works, and you can try different things for doing those contacts. And I'm kind of making an assumption here. You're talking about interacting with the individual, so I'm not sure if there's other background, and I don't want you to say more than you need to right now on that. I hope that's okay, Jean, because
Yep.
it's a difficult situation.
Yep. Barbara Menke comments, the early stages of dementia with my mom were difficult. I had a lot to learn. Another woman in my congregation had a mom with dementia and helped me, as I have done the same for others as I understood more. Is there a helpful resource for the very early confusion about what to do right after diagnosis?
There are, and one of the slides and one of the resources is actually labeled by the National Institute on Aging, next steps after a dementia diagnosis. So there are resources on there that you can go to that help explain things in more detail. And there are several, and it is actually broken down into several categories. And what I can do too, I know for that, I use the Alzheimer's Association. I was affiliated with that when I was in Michigan. Look for other resources and support groups, because I always tell caregivers that they wrote the book. They are the ones that have the tips and know what are the best things to do.
Cheryl Martin comments, some family or caregivers carry a business card that can be presented to others that gives a brief description of memory issues to add context to behavior. This may be helpful in a restaurant or other public place.
Those are excellent, and I forgot to add that to my presentation today. You can get that, and it says what we would do is, on one side of the business card, we would have please be kind, and on the other side, we would go through the steps of what they can do that helps be comforting to the individual and the family. And sometimes those vary just a little bit with what you're going through at the moment.
Jerry Minter comments, I have dealt with dementia in my husband for about 3 years, and I find that it is a journey. No 2 days are alike.
And go ahead. Go
I
ahead,
don't,
Jean.
did you have a comment on that? That's fine.
I was just going to add, understand that what worked yesterday may not work today. And what worked today may not work tomorrow. And thank you, Jerry, because we all have to understand we're doing the best that we can at that moment in time. And that's what caregivers need to tell themselves.
We have one last question from Paul Leakey. How important is it to identify a diagnosis of dementia versus mild cognitive impairment?
Okay, mild cognitive impairment is something that we see that may progress into Alzheimer's disease or other dementias now they're learning. But many people with mild cognitive development do not progress to a form of dementia. So we have to think about that. But whenever someone has just a diagnosis of dementia, what you really need to do is encourage them to have further studies done. I always encourage this with my patients and clients and would work on that, because certain types of dementia, we know there's different behaviors, different symptoms seen, and there are also different ways that you meet those people. Certain medications cannot be given to certain types of dementia. So always get a full diagnosis. And if someone has mild cognitive impairment, they also need to just be monitored regularly. And we can encourage folks to do that.
And we are at time. I
Yeah.
know Stan Dueck has a little bit of housekeeping for us at the end. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Hetty Sumner, for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us.
Thank you, Hetty, for sharing such a wonderful presentation that can be so helpful to us as individuals and families and congregations. In the chat box, I have placed the link to the CEU form. You can copy that link and fill out the online form, and the information will be processed, and then you will receive a CEU certificate for this event from the Brethren Academy of Ministerial Leadership, and that will be sent to you by email. Be patient. It takes a few days for those to be processed and sent to you. Again, thank you for your attendance, the many questions and comments, and the vulnerability that you shared with us by sharing some of your stories and experiences with family members and or friends who have dementia. And again, Hetty and Jean, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have this event and to co-sponsor with the Anabaptist Disabilities Network. And I'll leave this open for if there are a few more questions or comments that you'd like to make. Thank you.
I have put our email address, adnet@adnetonline.org, in the box, in the chat box. If you want to contact Hetty about a specific situation, or you have a question for her that you'd like to email to her, you can email our office and we will get that question forwarded to her. Brandon, yes, we can email the link to you for continuing education. I also put a link for our current newsletter. Our June newsletter for Anabaptist Disabilities Network is focused on dementia. And there's an article in there from Hetty and by articles by others, as well as resources. And if anybody, Hetty is willing to stay on. If anybody has some other questions, she's willing to chat a little while longer. So thanks, Hetty. Hetty, I'll say that there was just one more thing in the chat. Reverend Marjorie Lauver says, if your congregation has members who are in long-term care facilities, stay in touch. Visits may be difficult at this time, but send cards, notes, little reminders that they are thought of and cared about.
Always maintain those connections. Thank you for sharing that.